Whether you're building a new home or adding on, framing up the situation, or putting a roof over your head, if you need to rock it, roll it, or just get on with it, Hometime has a video to help you do it right. Transform your small bathroom into a luxurious master bath, or increase your home's value by updating your old kitchen. Keep your drains draining, your switches switching, and your footing firm. Whether you do it yourself or buy it yourself, Hometime's how-to video guides will help you get the results you want. Will make your next project a success. See your local home improvement retailer for the Hometime video that's right for you.
Hi, and welcome to Hometime. I'm Joanne Liebler.
And I'm Dean Johnson. This edition of Hometime is dedicated to those of us who always wanted a piece of the farm in the backyard, but weren't quite sure how to start it.
Well, that's just what we're going to show you how to do as we plant a vegetable garden in the backyard here.
We'll show you how to lay out and prepare a suitable bed for your garden. We'll explain the fine points of planting the right veggies at the right time. And we'll detail the steps you can take to make sure your garden produces a harvest your neighbors will marvel at. Hometime is made possible by Chevy Truck, who brings you Chevy full-size pickups, today's big pickups for professionals and do-it-yourselfers. Chevy S-Series pickups, today's compact pickups that play as hard as they work. Chevy's Astro all-wheel drive, today's mid-size van with standard four-wheel anti-lock brakes. Chevy trucks, the most dependable, longest-lasting trucks on the road. The National Hometime PBS series is made possible by the Stanley Works. Since 1843, Stanley's been committed to building quality tools and other products to help you do things right.
Your first consideration in starting a garden is deciding where to put it. And the sun is a crucial factor here.
All plants need light to flourish, so obviously the sun's a consideration. But vegetables in particular need a lot of sunlight, and the lack of direct sunlight is often the cause for a poor garden.
Our yard is pretty shady with all of the trees, but there's an area here on the north side that receives sun almost all day during the summer. So we're going to plant our garden right here.
It's fairly close to the house, so we aren't going to have to walk very far to water it. And the ground's level over here, so we don't have to worry about runoff. And it's protected from strong winds by the shrubs, the fence, and the garage.
We're laying out the perimeter for our garden by using stakes at the corner and string along the sides. It's based on a plan that we drew up earlier. I've got it, yeah. 18?
Yeah. Okay, you got it right there. Your garden can literally be any size you like, depending on the amount of room available, the amount of work you want to put into it, and the amount of vegetables you can eat, store, or give away at harvest time. The bigger your garden, the more work you'll put into it, and the more vegetables you get out of it. So you can figure about 1 pound to 1.5 pounds of veggies for every square foot of garden. So it does add up during a good season. We're planting a fairly large garden, 18 by 25 feet. That's so we can show you a variety of different vegetables. Now, if you have the time, you can take one on this size, but we recommend that a beginner try something a little bit smaller, since the maintenance of a large garden can overwhelm you.
And how about cutting away all the sod? That can overwhelm you too. Well, let's get started.
All right.
A square nose shovel gets you started. You dig down along the edge of the layout as deep as the grass. Then you remove the sod, leaving as much topsoil as you can.
If you have a large area, you can rent a sod cutter to skim the grass off more quickly.
Don't throw away the old sod. You can turn it into compost, a valuable soil conditioner. We'll show you how to start a compost pile a bit later.
With the sod removed, we get a much better look at the soil. Obviously, soil is one of the most important ingredients in gardening. If you have poor soil, chances are you'll have a poor harvest. But there are ways of improving even the worst soil, and we'll show you how.
We've never had a garden in this spot before, so we really weren't sure what the soil was like. And you need to determine the physical and chemical characteristics of soil before you can make any improvements on it.
Soil is made up of mineral particles and inorganic and organic materials. The size of the mineral particles determines a physical category: sand, clay, or loam.
Sandy soil is made up of relatively large particles. It's porous and it drains quickly, so plants rooted in it have trouble absorbing water. To improve sandy soil, you add what's known as an amendment. In this case, organic matter to thicken the soil mix. Clay consists of much smaller particles, which get sticky when wet and produce poor drainage. Plants in clay get too much water and too little air to thrive. Organic amendments will also improve clay soils. Loam is the third soil type. It's a mixture of both large and small mineral particles, and that combination provides an excellent medium for plants, and it doesn't need to be improved.
You need a microscope to get an exact determination, but in general, sandy soils feel grainy even when they're wet, and clay forms a lump when you squeeze it, and loam breaks into small clumps. This simple test seems to indicate that our soil is loam, the clay and sand combination. That means we don't need to improve the soil's physical mixture, but we still will be adding organic amendments to keep the quality high.
It's a bit more involved trying to figure out the soil's chemical composition, but it's essential if you want a successful garden.
So be sure to test your soil before you lay out your garden, so you can get whatever amendments are needed and you'll be all set to go.
You can send your samples to a soil testing lab, or you can do the testing yourself with kits that are available from nurseries. And that's what we did earlier.
We got a sample of the soil from the area we plan to put our garden, digging down several inches for a good cross-section. We used a kit that tests 4 factors crucial to a garden's success: pH level, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potash, a form of potassium. The pH level indicates the relative acidity of the soil. Now, different plants have different acid requirements. Nitrogen is necessary to help plants produce strong stems and leaves with a healthy green color. Phosphorus is crucial for flowering and fruiting plants, and potassium promotes the development of healthy roots and stems.
This kit provides different solutions to test your soil for each item. You just mix a little solution with soil in this syringe, and then you squeeze it through the filter into this bottle. That produces a liquid with a color that varies according to the amount of the element in your soil. This is the result of our test for pH. Comparing its color with the chart in the kit shows that our soil is slightly acidic. Test results can vary for soil samples, so it's a good idea to test several different times for each factor and come up with some sort of average result. Now, if the results vary a lot, you might want to send the sample to a lab to be tested. And they'll tell you what you need to do to make improvements to the soil.
Our soil testing shows us that the pH level is just fine for vegetables. If we're a little more acidic, we could add lime. If we're a little more alkaline, we could add gypsum, aluminum sulfate, or ammonium sulfate. The phosphorus is also fine, but we are low on nitrogen and potassium, but we'll incorporate those elements later in the form of fertilizer.
Ideally, we'd make this kind of adjustment in the late fall. Then the components could work their way through the soil throughout the winter. But any improvements we make now will help.
In the fall, we'll test again, add whatever we need to improve it, let it work its way in during the winter. Come next spring, we should really be in good shape.
Okay, we're ready to start cultivating the vegetable bed and to add the elements we need to improve the soil. Basically, we'll be bringing in new organic matter and adding nutrients that the soil lacks. And after we mix it all together, we can start planting.
You don't want to start turning the soil when it's too wet or dry. You want it to be just damp enough to form a clump when you squeeze it, and then crumble easily when you poke it. If it doesn't crumble, the soil's too wet. If it doesn't clump at all, it's too dry.
The idea is to really loosen up the soil so your plants can develop more easily. If you go this route, and it is recommended, your best bet is to use some variation on the double digging method. Essentially, you dig down a foot or more and exchange topsoil for bottom soil while adding organic matter. We're starting with a foot-wide trench down one side of the garden about 9 inches deep. We're collecting the soil in a wheelbarrow so we can later move it to the other side of the garden. Be sure to remove any rocks or solid debris you come across. Get rid of anything that might make your vegetable bed uncomfortable.
We're adding the first of our soil amendments to this trench here. We're starting with the organic material. We're using peat moss, but you could use compost or plain old barnyard manure. You spread the organic matter over every couple of feet of the trench. Then mix it in the soil at the bottom, chopping and stirring it to a depth of about 9 inches. Before digging the second trench, we've covered the rest of the garden with a layer of peat moss. Then it'll get mixed as we continue. Organic amendments do correct soil texture problems, and they help all types of soil, and applications are recommended annually in any garden. They do supply some nutrients, so they're sometimes confused with fertilizers. But their most important function is keeping soil loose for good drainage, ample aeration, and easy plant growth.
With the peat moss spread out, you can start digging your second trench right next to your first one, and you use the earth from the second trench to fill in your first. However, you don't want all the peat to stay on top, so you flip it over so it gets under the surface where it does the most good. That's the basic technique for double digging soil, and we continued it across our garden, exchanging and improving the soil in each trench.
Some gardeners prefer to skip this step, but in a small garden, there's no substitute for this kind of cultivation.
Now, some soils are so poor that improving them would take too much time and too much material. If that's the case, you might want to consider a raised bed. A raised bed gives vegetables a livable area above ground that might be too difficult to cultivate. You first need retaining walls to serve as the perimeter of the bed, and these can be made of stone, timber, or masonry. Just make sure there's drainage at the bottom of the walls. Then you fill in between the walls with soil and amendments to produce the right physical and chemical composition for the bed. Planting is the same as in a normal bed.
If you're thinking of double digging in a small garden, make sure you don't overdo it. It can be strenuous. When you get to the last trench, use the dirt you saved from the first trench to fill it in. Mix in some peat moss to give it a good texture. And when you're done, take a break. You've earned it. As our soil test indicated last month, the soil's lacking a few nutrients, so we're going to add some fertilizer. Now, we have a couple choices here. There are organic fertilizers and inorganic.
Both types of fertilizers supply 3 crucial nutrients: potassium, phosphorus, and nitrogen. Organic fertilizers are derived from natural products, things like bone meal, fish emulsion, and rock phosphate. Inorganic fertilizers are manufactured as chemicals, like ammonium nitrate, superphosphate, and potassium chloride. Both types of fertilizers work, so it's up to you whether to use organic or inorganic fertilizers. Just make sure you read the package directions.
On every bag of fertilizer, you'll see 3 numbers. These represent the percentage of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and they're always in that order. For example, we're using an 8-5-5 mixture. This means there's 8% nitrogen, 5% phosphorus, and 5% potassium.
If you're growing a lot of tomatoes, use a fertilizer that's high in phosphorus. Potatoes thrive on potassium, and for good vegetative growth, focus on nitrogen. But if you're planning on growing a lot of different vegetables, any balanced mixture will work.
We're throwing it out as evenly as we can. This works pretty well in a smaller garden. If you have a larger garden, you might want to use a spreader. Be careful. Too much fertilizer can hurt your soil and plants. 8% of our 25-pound bag is nitrogen, a total of 2 pounds. Our soil test shows us we only need 1 pound, so we're spreading just half the bag. Don't give your garden too much of a good thing.
Now we can add another layer of peat moss. We could go up to a couple of inches deep if our soil was poor, but don't worry about overdoing it. There's no such thing as too much organic matter in a vegetable garden. This treatment really helps a new garden, and it keeps an existing garden productive as well. Plants, wind, and rain take a lot out of the soil, so recondition it every spring and fall.
Now, we could use a shovel to mix in these amendments, but a rototiller works much better and it's a lot easier to use. If you do a lot of gardening, you might want to purchase one of these. Otherwise, it is possible to rent one. And always use manufacturer's guidelines for operation and safety. The tiller is designed to cut into the soil, turn it, mix it, and soften it for planting.
You start on one side of the garden and continue back and forth until you've covered the entire area. Then move across the rows you just tilled, making a crisscross pattern. Keep doing that as long as it takes to mix the soil and break the clumps down to a fine texture.
People walking across the seed beds can mash down what you spent hours fluffing up. So you should create paths with strings and stakes.
Then smooth out the beds using a dirt rake, and try to do this from the paths. If you can't quite reach the beds from the paths, well then walk gingerly as you rake.
You'll have more freedom later after you've planted your vegetables in established rows and beds. Then you can safely walk between them for weeding, watering, and harvesting.
At Hometime, we're always moving from job site to job site, hauling around a lot of tools and materials. So we need a truck that can handle the workload, like the Chevy S-Series extended cab pickup.
This truck is ideal whether we're hauling materials from this construction site or driving down the highway. Its new step-designed rear bumper and lower step-up height make loading and unloading easier than ever.
This two-tier loading feature lets us expand our cargo space. We can store tools on the bottom and materials on the top. And with these convenient cargo tie-downs, we can make sure everything stays secure.
No matter what kind of load we carry, this double-walled construction protects the truck inside and outside and keeps it looking new.
This extended cab gives us even more space for extra tools or for bringing along a couple of helpers on the tough jobs.
This Chevy full-size pickup 4x4 is another one of our favorites for do-it-yourself jobs. This truck comes standard with a 4.3-liter V6 engine to give us enough torque and towing capacity to clear a couple of trees from this new home site. Okay, back up a couple of more feet.
Also standard are its rear-wheel anti-lock brakes that give you controlled, smooth stopping. That's the kind of security you should demand from any braking system. Chevy's got it.
Even with all the work we put this truck through, it still looks like new. The double-walled cargo box keeps any wear on the inside from showing through on the outside.
And all of Chevy's fleet-side pickup trucks give us the option of two-tier loading. So we have the option of using the box as is or creating a second loading level. Okay, that's good. Whether we're carrying passengers, hauling cargo, or pulling a trailer, this all-wheel drive Chevy Astro passenger van is the perfect vehicle.
With its combination of all-wheel drive and four-wheel anti-lock brakes, this van gives us the control we need, even in the worst weather.
In fact, the Chevy Astro van has the largest towing capacity of any van in its class, and its versatility makes sense for every do-it-yourselfer.
The spacious cargo area is ideal for hauling these shrubs or any other material. And with these available Dutch doors, loading is even more convenient. No matter what size of your project, you'll get the job done with a Chevy truck.
They've been a big part of every Hometime project, and it's easy for us to see why the most dependable, longest-lasting trucks are Chevy trucks. We're ready to start planting now, but we can't do everything all at once. It's still a little too cold yet for some vegetables, yet some thrive in early spring. They're called cool season vegetables, and they're hardy enough to plant several weeks before the last hard frost.
Part of gardening is timing, knowing when it's safe to plant. And for that, you need to know the average date of the last frost in your region. Nurseries can help you out with this, or there's something called the Plant Hardiness Zone Map of North America. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has divided the continent into areas with similar climates. The zones are numbered 1 to 10, with a higher number indicating an earlier last frost, a shorter winter, and a longer growing season. For instance, we're in Zone 4 with the average last frost date about May 10th. That means we can plant our cool season vegetables sometime in April and warm season plants in mid or late May. If you're in a warmer zone, you can start your garden earlier, but the planting sequence is the same since each vegetable has its own preferred planting date in relation to the last frost.
Planting is important in gardening, especially in vegetable gardening. We're going to start by planting cool season crops in the southeast part of the garden. Then later on we'll fill in the rest of the garden with warm season crops.
We're going to start with lettuce in this corner bed. We could go in rows, but we're just going to sprinkle the seeds at random, and they'll hopefully grow into a lush patch of lettuce. It only takes lettuce a few weeks to grow. For a continuous crop, we'll plant the adjoining bed in a couple of weeks. That one will be growing as we harvest this one, and we'll have lettuce till the really hot weather hits. Sprinkle a layer of soil over the tiny seeds when you've laid them out, about a 1/4 inch, just enough to cover them up. After a couple of weeks, it's tough to remember what's planted where. So go ahead and mark off the area where you've seeded and give yourself some kind of a reminder of what's planted there.
Seeds need moisture once they're in the ground, so don't forget to water. Use a light touch with a watering can or a spray mister. Don't wash the seeds away or let the water puddle up. Just water real gently like this. Then keep the soil moist until the seeds sprout.
Ready to dig some rows?
Yep.
Here you go.
Thanks.
There are advantages to planting in rows. For one thing, it's easier to weed, water, and feed the vegetables. Our Swiss chard and beets are going to go here, so I'll just mark the ends of each row.
We're placing our rows 18 inches apart. This gives the plants plenty of room to grow. Now, of course, this depends on the vegetables you're planting, so it's a good idea to check the back of the packet to see how far apart to space the rows. And to dig the furrow, we're using a hoe.
Drop the seed into each furrow and cover it up. The package directions will tell you how deep you should go and how far apart each plant should be. In this case, we go about 3/4 of an inch down and 6 inches apart for our Swiss chard.
Tiny seeds like carrot seeds can be difficult to plant, and here's an interesting way to make that job a lot easier. Carrot seeds are available in biodegradable strips called seed tape.
You want some help with that?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and grab onto the end of that one. Here the seeds are spaced at just the right distance apart. Okay, yeah, stick it right in there.
Yeah.
Now you plant these just like you do regular seeds, by laying the tape in the ground and covering it up with dirt. And the tape will biodegrade as the seeds turn to full-grown carrots.
We're also going to plant a row of radishes in seed tape form, and we'll plant another row right next to that later on so that we can have a second crop right after the first one's harvested.
And that's a good example of how a small plot can be gardened efficiently to give you more vegetables than you might expect. We'll be showing you other techniques as the season wears on.
We're also planting some vegetables that were started inside. They've already sprouted, so they're ready for the garden. This is broccoli. We've got kohlrabi here, and these, of course, are onions. These seedlings are also known as vegetable transplants because they've been started indoors for eventual transplant outdoors. It's kind of a way to get a head start on your garden, especially in zones where you have a long winter and a short growing season.
Nurseries sell these in the springtime, but quite often experienced gardeners will grow their own plants indoors. It saves money and shortens up winter a bit. And here's how it's done.
This one here.
All you need to start seeds indoors are some containers, the seeds, some water, and the soil. Just about any potting soil you find in a nursery will do, but it's a good idea to mix in some vermiculite with the soil to keep it loose for the new roots.
The containers can be just about anything that will hold soil. These are made out of peat. They're handy because not only do you plant the seedling, but also the pot. Okay, why don't you go ahead and fill that one up.
Alrighty.
Place a seed in each compartment. Cover those with a little additional soil. And then moisten everything with a spray mister. Now, it's a good idea when you're done to label everything so you know where each seedling is located.
There you go.
Okay, thanks.
To keep the seeds moist, we're keeping our peat pots in this tray. The pots have holes on the bottom of each one, so when I pour water into the tray, it leaches into the pots.
Don't put that one.
Covering the trays holds in warmth and moisture. So cover for a couple of days until the seeds have had a chance to germinate. All right, there we are. Once the seedlings emerge from the soil, expose them to the sun or a grow light for about 12 hours a day. After they form 2 sets of leaves, you can transplant them to larger pots. Then when they're 6 to 8 weeks old, harden them off by setting them outside for a few hours a day. that will acclimate them to garden conditions and prepare them for outdoor planting. Okay, I'll start with the broccoli.
Okay.
Now we're putting the transplants in the garden. Joanne's planting the onions, and I'm going to start on the broccoli. If you buy these, you'll get several plants per cell pack. So pick out the healthiest ones you can find and water them an hour before you transplant. Remove the plant from its pan, preserving a ball of soil around the root. Set the plant in so its root ball is level with or slightly below the garden soil. Then cover the root of the plant. When planting your rows, remember that some vegetables take up more space, like broccoli, so we're going to plant them 2 feet apart.
Onions are tough enough for early planting. You can grow them in sets and harvest the early green onions, or you can plant transplants like these if you prefer the mature bulbs.
Kohlrabi is also an edible bulb that quite a few people find tasty. It comes from the same family as broccoli, except it's a little bit smaller, so we're able to plant it about 6 inches apart.
Well, that gives our garden a good spring start. We'll just keep these plants moist through these cool days, and in a few weeks, we'll be able to plant our warm season vegetables. It's been about a month since our camera last visited the garden, but we did monitor things. We kept the planting beds well watered, and when severe storms or frost were forecast, we covered them up. We also covered our footpaths with layers of newspaper and with grass clippings. It's a form of mulch that keeps the footpaths from getting too muddy. We'll talk more about the mulch a little later.
We've also planted flowers around the border. Some of those are starting to bloom nicely. They add to the overall appearance of the garden, and they'll also help keep away bugs, as we'll show you later.
There's something else growing here that we didn't plant, weeds. And you can always expect a good crop of these to pop up since dormant weed seeds are always present in soil. You can pull them out as soon as you can identify them, but be careful not to yank out your vegetables, mistaking them for weeds.
In the empty beds, we just go ahead and plow them under. Anyway, it's been a while since we tilled this area, so it's not a bad idea to stir up the soil before we plant our warm weather seeds.
We planted our cool season seeds here, the lettuce and the carrots and the radishes. And we marked what we planted so we wouldn't forget. And the leaf lettuce is doing pretty well in this bed. The carrot tops have started to pop up, and looks like the radishes are doing pretty well too. We'll be harvesting the first radish crop soon, but notice how thickly they're growing. We'll need to thin them out a little bit so that they can come in nice and big. And we'll leave about 1.5 inches to 2 inches between each plant.
Radishes and lettuce grow rather quickly, so you can harvest a lot fairly early on. Now, a way to stretch out the harvest season is by what's called succession planting. Here, Joe, can you help me with this a second? Let me get the one end of it. What we mean by succession planting is you plant your first crop of seeds like we did here, and then you come back a couple weeks later and plant a second crop. This way you harvest your first crop, come back a couple weeks later, and harvest the second crop.
Lettuce also grows quickly, so we're going to plant some more in this bed here. And this second crop should come in sometime before the summer heat strikes. You want to harvest both lettuce and radishes before that because they don't do well in the heat.
Okay, let's take a look at some of the other vegetables we planted before. Here we can already see the leaves for the beets and the Swiss chard. Soon we'll be able to harvest these for greens for salad, even before we pull the beets.
Over here, the onions are doing just fine. Remember, we planted these as seedlings, and the bulbs just keep getting bigger and bigger. And the kohlrabi transplants are doing well too.
Well, the broccoli's taken a hold in the garden. We're pounding in these 2-foot stakes so that later we can attach the broccoli to the stake with string so that the stems grow nice and straight.
We're going to start our warm season vegetable planting in this bed, which has been designated for sweet corn. We're growing these from seeds in furrows about 2 inches deep, and we plant 3 seeds at a time and space them 20 inches apart. Now, there are a lot of varieties available, but we're aiming for quick growth since we don't have an especially long growing season.
Now, we could plant and harvest the whole bed at once, but sweet corn tastes best when you pick it, cook it, and eat it all within 24 hours. It tends to lose some of its sweetness if you let it store too long. Now, we'll be planting this corn in succession and harvesting it over a longer period of time.
That means we plant 3 rows now and 2 more rows when the first group is about knee-high, and that'll take about 2 or 3 weeks. Corn stalks get tall over the summer, so be sure to leave 2 feet or more between the rows. Tomatoes don't grow as tall as corn, but they do take up a lot of room. You need to give each one about 2 or 3 feet of space on all sides. In warmer climates, you can start your tomatoes from seed, but with our shorter growing season, we need to start with transplants. And these transplants were started indoors about 2 months ago. We're putting 3 plants in this corner of the garden. We're setting these transplants deep in the soil, right up to the first set of leaves. Ideally, the plant will have 4 to 6 healthy leaves on its stem and will be thick and short, not long and thin. If you do have a leggy plant, bury the stem horizontally up to the first set of leaves. Roots will sprout from the stem and the plant should grow well.
Tomatoes tend to grow on vines along the ground without the proper training, so it's best to either stake the tomatoes or use metal guides like these to control their growth. And as the plants get bigger, simply train them along the supports.
We're planting 2 types of tomatoes, the full size and the smaller cherry tomatoes. We've got 3 varieties, each with different rates of growth, so they'll be maturing over 70 to 90 days.
We'll be planting a row of pole beans here on the north side of the garden. Now, because they grow so long, we've installed this trellis to help guide them. We made that out of 2x2s and lattice. And to make sure the beans grow up the trellis, I'll place my furrow right in front of it. These are planted in seed form about 1.5 inches or 2 inches deep. We'll start seeing the shoots in a week or 2. Pole beans are a good choice for a home garden because they continue to produce even after the first pods are picked.
Here, you ready for these?
Yeah, thanks. We're also going to plant morning glories just in front of the bean row. Here, I'll take... The morning glory is a vining plant too, and these will grow along the trellis and add some color to the bed.
We're planting summer squash and zucchini here in front of the beans. These are soft-skinned vegetables and they take about 2 months to mature. And you can start them from either seed or transplants. We're planting several squash seeds in a hill of soil. Later, we'll thin to the strongest plant, which will produce a lot of vegetables. So will this zucchini transplant, and we're leaving as much room as possible since these spread out quite a bit. We're planting a type of cucumber to finish this bed. It grows in bush form and produces a pickling cucumber.
We put the eggplants and the peppers here in front of the broccoli. Once they grow out, they take up quite a bit of space, so we've given them ample room. Now we're planting red, green, and yellow peppers. So come harvest time, we should have some nice looking colors.
The fertilizer we put on when we first tilled the soil is enough to get the vegetables started, but we'll be adding more as the vegetables start to grow. We'll talk about that later.
There's a few things we should be concerned about at this stage of the garden. First of all new plants and seeds should get plenty of moisture as they become well established.
Mulching around the vegetables can save on watering and on weeding. It lessens the evaporation rate and keeps the weeds from growing through, so you don't have to weed as often. Mulch is any loose, organic material placed over the soil. We're using old newspapers just like we did on the paths. It goes between the plants that have already emerged, covering up the soil. Don't mulch seeded areas until the seeds have sprouted. We're putting grass clippings over the newspaper to hold the paper down. Both layers will eventually decompose in the soil. Just don't use any color sections from the paper. The colored ink isn't good for the soil.
You've seen the flowers around the borders. Not only do they add to the appearance of the garden, but they also help keep bugs away. The roots of the marigolds produce a substance that repels nematodes.
We're also growing some herbs. The aromas are said to confuse insects and drive them away. We got some chives and some parsley right here.
Finally, it's a good idea to protect your plants from rabbits, dogs, and other small animals with some type of fencing. We're setting up ours along the perimeter. One like this is nice because you can take it down whenever you work in your garden. Now it's up to the vegetables to do a little work.
Now we could relax and enjoy the late spring weather, but here at Hometime, we never rest. But seriously, there is something we can do for the garden without actually being in the garden. We're starting up a compost pile that'll give us a rich supply of humus.
Humus is what you get when organic matter decomposes, and it's good for the soil. But it can take nature a long time to accomplish this. But compost can speed up the process, and it's a much better way of using garbage rather than filling up landfills.
You can dig a trench for compost, or you can put a wire frame on the ground. Or you might like a more appealing setup like this compost bin. Whichever you decide, you should keep it in a shady area and near a ready source of water. You first put in organic matter, things like grass clippings, leaf debris, vegetable food waste, hay, or sawdust. And you can put in the sod you cut out to start your garden. Don't use meat scraps or cat or dog waste, though. And don't use lawn clippings if the grass has been treated with weed killers. Build the first layer up to 6 or 7 inches.
It'll slowly decompose on its own, but we can speed things up a bit by introducing a catalyst, like a fertilizer or this organic product. It cuts down the composting time by introducing a bacteria that's crucial to decomposition. Spread the catalyst on top of the layer.
Then sprinkle it with water. Moisture is crucial to the composting process.
Over time, you'll build up several layers, but don't compact the layers. You'll need air moving through it for the composting process. Then we just add a little more catalyst and some more water.
There we go. That's good.
Yeah, that'll do it.
This bin closes up tight to seal in the heat that composting creates, and it speeds up the process. And we'll come back every week or so and stir it with a pitchfork, and be sure to keep it moist.
Then in a month or so, we'll have a finished compost. At that point in time, we'll show you what to do with it. I'll grab this one.
Alrighty. Wow, Dean, look at this lettuce. The color's perfect.
Well, it does look nice. It's coming along good.
We planted this first bed of lettuce about 6 weeks ago, and already there's more than enough for several salads. Lettuce continues to grow after you cut it, and the second batch that we planted that's right in front of it should be ready to harvest in about 2 weeks. So we'll have fresh lettuce till the extreme heat of summer arrives.
We've kept everything fairly moist, so the entire garden's been doing really well so far. And the Swiss chard's also ready for the salad bowl. And again, as we cut this, it'll continue to grow throughout the summer, even after we've harvested the first leaves. And the beet greens are also ready. The beets themselves aren't quite ready yet, so we'll leave in most of those. But we do pull up some of the small beets to thin the rows. This will help the remaining ones grow large.
Uh-oh, Dean. We blew it here.
Why, what's wrong?
We let these radishes go too long. You want to harvest radishes before they get too woody or before they go to seed. Here's one that isn't so good. When the radishes get this big, the texture inside tends to be woody. Now, this one, on the other hand, is just right. We'll do a little bit better with our second row.
I guess we should have followed our vegetable chart a little bit closer. It helps, once you have all your vegetables planted, to organize a vegetable calendar on a chart like this one. Seed packets or reference books will tell you the average growth time for your crops. Add that to your planting date, and you'll know about when your vegetables should be ready for harvest.
We were just careless when we left those radishes sit in the ground too long, but sometimes things go slower or faster than you expect.
Yeah, like the kohlrabi here. These are already a couple to 3 inches in diameter. They weren't supposed to be ready for a couple of weeks. Now they're ready for harvesting. Now you can boil these like broccoli, or you can just eat them raw. We pull these out and clear the row. Now we have a lot of growing season left, so we put in more kohlrabi for a second harvest this fall.
The broccoli is also doing well. Just look at the size of the leaves. The part that you eat is inside of the leaves, and it's called a bud cluster. You just cut the top off with some stem, and that'll let other clusters develop. They'll eventually go to flower, so don't leave them too long.
Our first batch of sweet corn is already several inches high. We're ready now to plant our second batch. The reason we plant these in succession again is so that we can enjoy the sweet corn longer throughout the harvest season.
None of our vegetables have experienced any insect problems so far, and we're going to keep it that way by releasing some insects of our own. Ladybugs feed on aphids, chinch bugs, and a lot of other pests. You can get them commercially and disperse them in your garden, 1 bug for every square foot or so. Now, we're dispersing them while it's still light so you can see them, but you really should wait till dark. That's when they're most likely to stay where you put them. We haven't talked much about watering your vegetables, just that you need to keep them damp as they get established. After that, the weather, the soil, and the type of vegetables that you planted will determine how much you need to water them. Now, a rain gauge will tell you how much nature's providing, but you'll have to see for yourself whether that's enough. Check the soil regularly with your fingers. If it's dry an inch down, it means you need water. Wilting vegetables are another sign that water is needed. Now, you can use a sprinkler, or you can lay out what's called a soaker hose. It's semi-porous, so water leaks out all along its length and gives the garden a good soaking if you leave it on long enough.
And don't forget that mulching can help cut down water loss in the summer heat.
Looks like you're all set.
Yeah, this is done.
Well, let's call it a day.
All right. This looks good. Boy, it looks like the summer heat really helped out this corn.
Yeah, looks like both crops are coming along well. Ooh, radishes don't look so good.
Oh, really?
We're well into the heat of summer, and it looks like it's been a little too much for our radishes. Here's what happens to them when it gets too hot. They begin to flower, and the vegetable just doesn't have a chance to develop. So, we may as well clear this row.
Here, you probably need that. Now, the lettuce that we planted here in the first bed is pretty well done for the summer, so we might as well harvest this, and we'll have room to plant something else.
We still have enough growing season for several types of vegetables. We'll plant another row of carrots along here, and we'll put bush beans in the old lettuce bed.
It's been about a month since we planted our pole beans and set up this trellis. You can see how the bean plants kind of vine up through the trellis, but it will be a while before we get any beans. Say, Joe, we better water when we're done here. We didn't get too much rain this week.
Okay. And this broccoli is definitely done. I'll just cut off these last spears. Some of these stalks have begun to flower, but they should still be tender enough to eat. Our broccoli matured in less than 2 months, so we've removed all the old exhausted plants and we're going to put in some new broccoli transplants. There's enough summer left for them to mature.
Many of our vegetables don't need any more fertilizer than we gave them at planting, but some need more, like the onions, the eggplant, the tomatoes, and the corn back here. For corn, use a fertilizer high in nitrogen to help the stalks, and figure on about 2 feedings. Once when the corn is a foot high, then again when it's about 2 feet high. Water thoroughly after each feeding.
You can give your tomatoes a meal after they start bearing fruit, but use a fertilizer that's low in nitrogen and high in potassium and phosphorus to promote fruit growth. Just follow package instructions for the right amount of fertilizer, and then work it into the soil around the base of the plants. Insects can be a problem, and you may want to use a pesticide. If you do, be sure to use caution and read all the directions. Now, this chemical is designed to kill insects that infest tomatoes.
Something's been chewing on our bean leaves, so we're going to use a natural product that's now available to help control insect problems. This goes on in powder form. Again, read instructions before using. For severe infestations, you can get advice from your local nursery. The corn in the back row was put in about 8 weeks ago. You can see it's already just about 9 feet tall. And the tassels came in sometime last week. It's actually the tassels that produce the pollen that trigger the growth of the ears. Here you can see an ear already starting to develop. You should have corn here in 2 to 3 weeks. You'll find that midsummer is when most of your vegetables really start to bloom. In fact, you'll probably have more vegetables than you know what to do with. As an example, these peppers are ready to pick. Now these are hot peppers. And these are red peppers. They develop from the plant's flowers, so we'll get peppers as long as the plants bloom, which should pretty much be all summer. Eggplants also develop from the plant's flowers. Now these plants are fairly immature. Here's one, a tiny little one. So it'll be a while before we're harvesting this one. But like all vegetables, you want to watch these very closely so you're able to harvest them at just the right time. Jojo, how do the carrots look?
Oh, they look pretty good, actually. We planted these carrots almost 3 months ago from seed strips, and we've been pulling a couple of the baby carrots over the last month or so. But let's see how they're doing now. Oh yeah, these are definitely ripe enough to eat. Now we'll pull most of these now and over the next few days, and we'll leave a few of the shorter ones to harvest over the next couple weeks. There's one. We've let these onions swell up to a pretty good size, so we're going to harvest those right now. And this second batch of kohlrabi has come along too, so we'll be pulling these and clearing these as we need them. Those bush beans that we planted in this first lettuce bed are starting to come up, and we also cleared out the second lettuce bed a couple of weeks later and planted more bush beans. Now this is an example of succession planting. It means that we'll have a continual harvest of bush beans after the first batch is ripened, which should take about a month.
Tomatoes take a while to mature, but you know you've definitely turned the corner when the plant develops blossoms and the blossoms turn into fruit. If the blossoms are dropping off or if they look like they've stalled out on you, it might be because they weren't pollinated. Now here's a tip. Give the plant a gentle shake once the blossoms appear to help pollination. Now these plants look pretty good. We should have some nice looking tomatoes here in a couple of weeks. We expect these cherry tomatoes to mature first. They ripen quite a bit sooner than a regular tomato.
Our pole beans aren't quite ready for harvesting yet. You want the pods to be at least 3 inches long before you pick them. The zucchini, on the other hand, is just right. You want to eat them before they get too big. They emerge under the plant's flowers and they'll grow indefinitely on their vines. You'll find that they're best when they're about 4 to 6 inches long. Now the zucchinis over here aren't quite ripe enough, so we'll let them go a little longer. This summer squash is ready to come out. You can let it ripen a little bit longer than you would a zucchini, but if it gets much longer than 10 inches, it won't be as tender. Pickling cucumbers are ready when they're about 5 to 6 inches long. Now these are perfect for slicing in salads, but they're a little too big for pickling. And these should keep coming in for the next several weeks after this first batch is ripened.
The Swiss and rhubarb chard has continued to produce greens for our salads all summer. We've also been harvesting the beet greens from time to time. In fact, the beets themselves are ready. And one thing you want to remember about beets is you can over-ripen them. So you want to check these from time to time to make sure you're harvesting them at just the right time.
For most of the season, we've been renewing our garden mulch with grass clippings, but finally we have some compost ready in our bin. So we'll be using some of this today in the garden. Just give it a couple turns with a pitchfork, and then sift out the pieces that were just too big to decay. Then you're left with black organic matter known as compost. Then, just spread it over the garden to help renew the soil.
All right, we've been gardening all summer long. I'll have to admit this is definitely our favorite part of the job. We just harvested our first ears of sweet corn. We're cooking these up for some supper. Jojo, why don't you just grab a couple more? That should be plenty.
Okay, be right there.
Put the top on these. They should steam nicely.
There's one. It's the first crop of corn that we're harvesting now. And you can tell that the corn is ripe because the silks are golden brown and the kernels are nice and juicy. Now the second crop that we planted is just about ready, but could really use a little more time.
The corn will be ready in just a second.
Okay.
Say, have you looked at the tomatoes yet today?
Uh-uh.
Here's one. Now, as most people know, you want to pick tomatoes as they turn red, or as they're just about ready to turn red. You can always let them ripen in the kitchen window, but definitely get them before they get soft.
The pole beans are coming in. Now you don't want to let these sit too long or they start getting rubbery, and they'll keep coming back after you've picked them and until the first frost hits. Well, Dean, let's eat.
All right, I'll be there in just a second. Would you mind checking the corn?
Sure.
All right. As the weather cools off and the summer vegetables clear out, you can plant the fast-growing cool season vegetables like lettuce or even radishes. Boy, here's a nice pepper. I'll pull that one off. It varies from region to region, but eventually in the fall your garden will die out, and that's where ours is at right now.
So we're going to clean it out and give it a good start for next year's garden. It's similar to what we did in the spring.
The first step is clearing out the garden debris. Just rake it up and haul it out, or use it for compost. Now turn the soil over to loosen it up for the winter. We double dug in the spring, but one turn is fine for the autumn. Then you can add organic amendments to give the soil a boost.
We're putting down peat moss to keep our soil aerated. We're also adding compost and fertilizer to replace the nutrients the vegetables took out over the summer.
Use the tiller to work these amendments into the soil and rake the soil smooth.
By spring, the amendments will have worked their way in, and the soil should be in great shape for another season of vegetable gardening. One nice thing about gardening is that it doesn't take very long for the beginner to get the hang of it. Of course, there's always more to learn, but that's kind of the fun of it.
Well, it's kind of like baseball. You're always saying, boy, wait till next year. It's something to look forward to. So for Hometime, I'm Dean Johnson.
And I'm Joanne Liebler. Thanks for watching.
Hometime is made possible by Chevy Truck. Who brings you? Chevy full-size pickups. Today's big pickups for professionals and do-it-yourselfers. Chevy S-Series pickups. Today's compact pickups that play as hard as they work. Chevy's Astro all-wheel drive, today's mid-size van with standard four-wheel anti-lock brakes. Chevy trucks, the most dependable, longest-lasting trucks on the road. The National Hometime PBS series is made possible by the Stanley Works. Since 1843, Stanley's been committed to building quality tools and other products to help you do things right.